Good morning and welcome to our 10 minutes at 10 today. So we are live and we are going to talk to you today about the golden rules behind getting paid faster. So there are 7 golden rules for getting yourself paid faster from your client.
Now, the first one is when you actually issue the invoice, issue it as a quote and always include any terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Now, that's a really important one, and that sounds quite obvious to some people, but actually, not including terms and conditions is probably one of the biggest things we found that causes issues when it comes to actually getting payments. Because simply, you've got to make sure your client actually, one, knows your terms and conditions, and two, most importantly for this point, make sure they actually accept the quote and they accept the terms and conditions. Because the amount of times they don't, and then that's when it gets payment issues. It's a massive pain. It's a massive pain because all of a sudden you find that actually you're trying to get a client to pay. They haven't agreed to anything. They haven't accepted the quote. They haven't agreed to any terms and conditions. So it leaves you in a bit of a bad situation where actually it makes it really hard to pursue the debt.
Yeah, now one of the most common issues we see behind invoice objections is the amount being paid or the amount being charged, and that's where the terms and conditions or issuing a quote first is really, really important. So if you're using Xero, Xero has a really simple but really effective quotation functionality, which allows you to then issue the quote from Xero. It states what price you're being paid and for what job is being done. You can put as much or as little detail in the invoice as you want. We recommend more, the more the better. And then it allows you to push that quote out to your customer, and the customer electronically signs it and accepts it, at which point you've got their confirmation that they've understood what they're buying, why they're buying it, what the price is going to be, and what your payment terms are going to be, because all of those will be in your quote. So if you can get that done, that makes a huge amount of difference for getting paid on time and in full without any disputes. Number 2, another really obvious one you would have thought, is to get your invoices issued promptly. Now, one of the challenges we see with small business owners is they're so busy during the month doing the work that they often issue invoices at the end of the month, or maybe 1 or 2 or 3 weeks into the following month. If you can, try and get into the habit of doing the work today and then invoicing at the end of the day. So if that's the nature of your business, then perhaps you're able to do a job and then invoice that at the end of each day. Now, we offer consultancy, so our consultancy is often sold in monthly batches. So if we're going to do ad hoc invoicing, we will do them at the end of the month. Now, because that involves a lot of work, sometimes that drags on, a week or 2 weeks, depending on whatever is going on. Now, you're more likely to get paid sooner if you can get that invoice generated earlier and issued out to your client. There's no need to wait for it at all.
Essentially, if you wait 2 weeks, you're adding 2 weeks to your payment terms.
Yeah, and
basically,
then the customer, sometimes we see that the customer might have forgotten, or if you do a really good job and you invoice today, the customer sees the invoice coming in their invoice and often arranges for immediate payment. If it's 2 or 3 or 4 weeks down the line, quite often what happens then is they'll remember the job, but that excitement or the pleasure of you doing the job has waned a bit. They've forgotten what a great job you did. So you just go into a queue. So again, you'll get paid a lot faster if you invoice a lot sooner.
Makes a massive difference. Another one is make sure your sales invoices are really clearly laid out. So that's a really key one. Make sure that the customer knows exactly what they're buying into, and make sure that it's really easy to see it on the actual invoice. Because a bit of a mad moment. Make sure it's really, really clear. So basically, we want to make sure they can understand exactly when the invoice is raised. They want to know the due dates, everything. Make sure everything's really clear. Make sure there's no way they can look at it and go, right, I don't understand this. And make sure that all the information is there. So that's a really key one.
So we do see quite often the person paying the bill or the person approving the bill is not always the person who had authorised it in the first place. So if you send something out that just says consultancy or project XYZ, it's not so easy to understand and push it through the approval process. And if you get held up, you don't get paid. So number 4 is to issue your sales invoices to both the person who raised the order in the first place and accounts payable. Some of the most organisations, big organisations, will have an accounts payable team, or will often have an accounts at inbox. The problem with just sending your invoice to the person who you liaise with to do the job, unless of course they're the only person in the business, is that it might often sit in their inbox and it doesn't get passed on to the person who's responsible for making the payments and signing them off. So always make sure you send it both to accounts payable and the person who has arranged for the sale in the first place.
That is so common. The amount of times I'll see an email come back from one of the client's customers and they'll say, oh yeah, I've just passed this through to accounts payable. And then you look at the email trail and they've been chasing their team internally, and all of a sudden you think, well, if it just gone to them in the first place, it would have been problem solved.
And then you find if it's going to somewhere like that, it then has to sit and wait for another 3 weeks while it goes through their invoice approval process.
Exactly.
Or it might go on the next month end's payment run, and again, it just creates more unnecessary delays that we really don't need.
So another one is short payment terms and an invoice due date. I'll emphasize that the due date is really vital. So basically, if you want to get paid quickly, don't put 30 days on your invoice, but also likewise, don't leave it blank, because if you do leave it blank and you want to be paid in 14 days, they're going to automatically assume probably 30 days. Really, really common. And we see this a lot. Either no due date, and then of course you have no idea when they actually need paying, so you just assume it's 30 days, and then all of a sudden they chase you after 7. Who knew?
Yeah, we see that a lot, don't we? Especially with that's really common, it seems, with small businesses and contractors. So freelancers and one-man bands, that kind of supplier. So if they if you're running that kind of business, make sure that your due date is clearly put on your invoice, because it just, people will assume it's 30 days if it's not there, and it does cause an issue for a lot of people. And we had I spoke to somebody last week from one of our clients who was desperate to get paid, and it had been agreed with the director that the director would pay them immediately on presentation of the invoice, but they didn't tell us in the accounts team. So of course we put it on at 30 days, and they rang 2 or 3 days later. They was desperately short of cash, and we were able to arrange payment the same day. But the point is, the accounts team didn't know. So put your due date on the invoice. Make sure it's clearly understood what your terms are, both in your accounts team and when you send the invoice out to people.
Yeah, and if you're using an electronic system, just check that when you're raising the invoice, the due date hasn't defaulted to something you don't want it to.
Which is really common as well.
Yeah, make sure your defaults are right, and make sure if it's changed, just overwrite it.
So point 6 is to include purchase order numbers where required. If you're working with a large organisation that goes through a pre-authorisation process, they will only pay you if you put the right purchase invoice number on your sales invoice. Now, again, that's another really common issue we see with clients who have these arrangements with larger blue chip organisations. So the really slick ones always have that purchase order in place, and they don't deliver the service until the purchase order is there. Now, some people, some businesses, the larger businesses, won't supply you with the purchase order until after you've delivered the service, and that creates another layer of delay. So you're trying to raise your invoice, you've done the service, and you can't even get the invoice out because they still haven't issued a purchase order. So if you do need one, put it on as on the invoice that you're sending out. And if you need to get one, you need to have a process and a contact person in place to make sure you get that when you need it, so that you can raise your invoice out for payment.
And even better, if you can get one that covers, say, a service agreement.
Yeah,
say,
they do blocks.
They do
purchase order blocks.
If you get one of those, even better, because next time you don't have to chase for it, you don't have to search your emails for it. So if you can get one that extends to, say, a longer term, then
so sometimes it's a term, a period of time, isn't it? And sometimes it's
PO or something.
and sometimes it's an amount. So the PO is capped up to a certain level, at which point you need to go and get another PO to put onto your invoices. So either way, make sure you've got one.
Then, of course,
Point
send
7.
your invoices electronically. We do actually, it's not as common anymore, but we do still see some clients who issue invoices via the post. Simply, they can get lost in the post, or the excuse is it's got lost in the post. Whether or not you've actually delivered it and it's got to them, we don't know. They might have just lost it in the office rather than in the post.
Yeah, that's
But
really
it
common.
does happen. So whenever you can, send electronically. And to be honest, now in today's day and age, I'm surprised that anyone wouldn't accept an electronic invoice. It'd be very rare. But options there. You've got systems in place. You can use it. And the good part about sending electronically is you can see who it was sent to. You can see when it was sent. You can, depending on the system, you can even see when the invoice is opened. So really important. And then they can't say it's lost in the post, because you can literally log in and say, well, you received it that day. I can see because you opened it.
Yeah, and that's another added value in Xero. So Xero has that functionality. So if you don't send a PDF attachment, it forces or encourages the person who's receiving the invoice to click on the link to download the PDF. That way you can always check at what date, point and time a person has opened that invoice. So that's really useful to use. You don't need it perhaps if your customer is quite well behaved, but if they're a bit naughty and if they're inclined to tell you that they haven't received it when you really do know they have, this is a great function for putting that in place and making sure that they don't have that excuse to delay payment of your invoice. So that's us for today. That is our 7 golden rules for getting invoices paid faster on time. So thank you for joining us today. If you have any queries, please let us know in the comments. And if you've enjoyed today's video, please let us know in the comments. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye. For now.